Tolkien created a masterpiece, but the games are kinda hit and miss. Welcome to WatchMojo.com, and today we're counting down our picks for the top 10 best and worst Lord of the Rings games. Before we begin, we publish new videos every day, so be sure to subscribe for more great content. For this list, we're actually going to be doing something a little differently, as we'll be alternating between the 5 worst and 5 best video games set in J.R.R. Tolkien's world of Middle-earth.
Right you are, sir. Them dirty horse stalls can wait.
Number 5 worst. The Lord of the Rings, Aragorn's Quest. Aragorn's Quest is certainly not the worst Lord of the Rings game, but it's not far off. It has a few things going for it though, including Howard Shore's orchestral score, decent voice acting by Sean Astin, and tons of enemies which fill the screen and lend the game an epic vibe. On the other hand, the graphics are kind of atrocious for a title released in 2010, the hit detection was spotty, and the game was far too easy and repetitive, which admittedly makes sense since it was intended for kids. I think we can all say that, king or not, Aragorn deserves better than this.
We'll finish the tale later.
Number 5 best, Lego Lord of the Rings. When one thinks of Lord of the Rings, Lego is not usually what comes to mind. But that being said, this game is easily one of the most faithful entries in the Rings video game canon.
This is the One Ring, forged by the Dark Lord Sauron.
Locations are beautifully realized and various facets are ripped straight from the films, including the epic music and sound effects, which helps the trilogy's epic scope transition from film to game. It's also basically a blast to play, complete with the signature LEGO humor and some fun co-op mechanics. It's not only one of the best Lord of the Rings games, but it's arguably one of the best LEGO games on the market too. Number 4 worst, The Hobbit.
Thank you, stone giants! You've made my escape for me!
In 2003, the film trilogy was wrapping up and EA was killing it with their licensed video games. At the time, Vivendi Universal held the rights to the video game adaptations of Tolkien's novels. And to get on that money train, they released The Hobbit. It is probably the most average thing you will ever play. While it was a great recreation of the novel, everything else is just kind of meh. The gameplay was a mediocre Zelda clone, it was too easy, and it was geared for kids, which meant Tolkien fanatics were pretty much shafted. But hey, if you were 8 around the time you got to play it, you probably enjoyed it. Number 4 best, The Lord of the Rings, Battle for Middle-earth 2. Real-time strategy games may not be everyone's cup of tea, but if you're a Lord of the Rings fan, then you definitely need to check this game out. For one thing, the game is gorgeous to watch and listen to, and it truly immerses you into the world of Middle-earth. It also obtained the licenses for both the films and the novels, so characters who didn't make it into the film are a welcome appearance here. This being the second game, it improved upon the promise of the original, but both are truly among the most underappreciated of the Lord of the Rings games out there.
We've defeated one of our enemies.
Number 3 worst, The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring. And here we have another Vivendi release, except this time it's less most average game ever and more veering into bad territory. The game, like The Hobbit after it, is a faithful recreation of Tolkien's story, but the gameplay leaves a lot to be desired. The combat is incredibly basic and boring, and there were some glaring pacing issues as you play through the slower sections of the novel.
I wonder how many lucky wishing stones are at the bottom of this well.
EA completely obliterated this game with their Two Towers release 1 month later, and sequel plans were quickly scrapped as a result.
Bet I'd better get going.
What? Oh, right you are, Frodo.
Number 3 best, The Lord of the Rings Online. If there's one licensed series that deserves an MMORPG, it's probably The Lord of the Rings, and luckily this one mostly delivered. It's a fantastic Lord of the Rings experience, as it features arguably the most authentic recreation of Middle-earth in gaming, a fantastic soundtrack, and a cosmetic system which makes you truly feel like a member of Tolkien's high fantasy world. Aside from that, it's also a pretty darn good MMO in general, complete with a very friendly community, a current free-to-play model, and server consolidations to keep the game populated. Even 10 years on, this is a must-play for big fans. Number 2 worst, J.R.R. Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings Volume 1. Not to be confused with the 1990 game of the same name, which was released for MS-DOS and wasn't nearly as crappy. And by crappy, we mean borderline unplayable. Pretty much everything about this game is terrible, aside from maybe the graphics, which were pretty good at the time, 1994 after all. Combat consisted of a one-button attack. The levels were insanely huge and really easy to get lost in, and it exploits every single terrible RPG cliche in the book. Oh, and that doesn't even include your AI companions that just kinda get lost sometimes. Number 2, best, The Lord of the Rings, Return of the King.
Legolas! Gandalf, up here! The wall must be defended! Hurry, more are coming!
Video games based on movies are rarely any good, but hot damn does the Return of the King get it right. Everything about this game's pretty polished, from the gorgeous graphics to the intricate levels to its award-winning sound design. It truly captures the frenetic pacing and scope of that movie's battles, and co-op mode makes mowing down orcs and trolls even more epic. There's also an increase in environmental interaction here, and many of the movie's characters are playable, which is a dream come true for fans of the films. It is easily one of the best licensed games out there.
Have we failed?
The dead shall fight when your people are closest to us.
Number 1 worst, The Lord of the Rings, Conquest.
Slay the torchbearers! Bring them down!
It seemed like such a good game on paper. Have Pandemic Studios make another Battlefront, only this time with Lord of the Rings characters and swords instead of lasers. It turns out that idea probably should have stayed on paper. Conquest was missing everything that made Battlefront great, and it resorted to cheap gameplay like button mashing combat, atrocious AI, and a criminally short campaign. Even the production values were bad, as the graphics, voice acting, and sound were all laughably embarrassingly bad. If only they had more time to polish this one, because it reeks of incompletion and suffered terribly as a result. Number 1 best, Middle-earth, Shadow of Mordor. No one was expecting much from this title helmed by Monolith Productions, but they absolutely knocked it out of the park, surprising us all and creating what is arguably the greatest Lord of the Rings inspired game of all time. It introduced us to a badass M-rated version of the world, and came complete with extremely fluid animations, smooth swordplay, and enough decapitated heads to fill Mount Doom. It also featured some very innovative game design, namely the Nemesis system, and it was filled with enough lore to keep even the most die-hard Tolkien fans happy. In short, it was not only a mesmerizing Lord of the Rings experience, but a fantastic game in general.
My playtime will be agony for you now, sweetness.
Do you agree with our picks? Check out these other great clips from WatchMojo and subscribe for new videos every day.